All right, let's talk about the economy. Because if you're feeling a little bit confused by it all, you are definitely not alone. So today, we're going to try and crack this case together and figure out what is actually going on.
You know how it is, right? One day, you turn on the news, the stock market is hitting record highs. The very next day, the headline is all about stubborn inflation that just won't go away. We hear about these amazing job numbers, but then you see another story about big tech layoffs. It feels like you're getting all these contradictory clues, and it's impossible to know what to believe. So what is the real story here?
Well, to solve this mystery, we need a secret weapon. And ours is something called the Beige book. Now, I know what you're thinking, another dry economic report, right? Nope, this is different. Think of it less like a spreadsheet and more like the economy's diary, or maybe a detective's dossier. It's packed with real, on-the-ground stories from actual business owners, from community leaders, from people who are seeing what's happening firsthand. The Federal Reserve puts this out 8 times a year, and honestly, it's our best guide to what's really going on out there.
Okay, so for our investigation, let's start with the 30,000-foot view. We're going to look at the big national picture. What happens when you connect all these dots?
So the first big clue we uncover is, well, a sense of cautious optimism. The latest report says that overall, economic activity has actually picked up a little bit. We're not talking about a massive roaring boom here, but it is a noticeable improvement. The last few reports were kind of flat, so this is definitely a change.
But here's where it gets really interesting. That national picture, it's not the whole story. See, the U.S. is split into 12 different Federal Reserve districts, and things look pretty different depending on where you are. 8 of those 12 districts, they saw slight to modest growth. 3 of them, pretty much no change. And only 1, the New York district, actually reported a bit of a decline. So the big takeaway here is that the economy isn't just one single thing. It's a patchwork quilt, a really diverse landscape.
So when you put all of that together, what do you get? Well, the official word they used is mildly optimistic. And I love that phrasing. It's not wildly optimistic, right? It's just mildly. It sets this tone of, okay, things are getting a little better, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. And to really understand why it's only mildly, we've got to dig into who is actually doing the spending out there.
And this brings us to our next big clue, which reveals this. Huge split right down the middle of the country, and it all boils down to how people are spending their money. It's almost like a tale of 2 consumers, both living in the same economy but having totally different experiences.
So on one side, you've got higher income households, and the Beige book is just filled with stories about them. They're spending pretty freely on luxury goods, on travel, on fancy experiences. They are, without a doubt, a huge force propping up a lot of the economy right now. But then you have the other side of the coin, low to moderate income consumers. And for them, it is a completely different world. They are becoming incredibly price sensitive, really pulling back on anything that isn't an absolute must-have. And this quote right here, it just illustrates that divide perfectly. This is a direct witness statement, if you will, from the New York report. You've got a big hospitality group saying that demand for their expensive, high-end restaurants is strong, but their middle-of-the-road places, they're really struggling. I mean, that's not a data point on a spreadsheet. That's a real business owner telling you exactly what this 2-track economy looks and feels like.
Okay, so this split we're seeing, it obviously has a huge knock-on effect on another massive piece of this puzzle, jobs and pay. So let's look at what the Beige book is telling us about the health of the labor market right now.
So what the report paints is a picture of a job market that's, well, it's cooling down. It's stabilizing. We're seeing a couple of key things happening. For one, most of the hiring that's going on is just to backfill jobs, to replace people who've left, not to create a bunch of brand new positions. We're also seeing that fewer people are job hopping, jumping from company to company for a better offer. And maybe most importantly, wage growth. It's finally coming back down to more normal pre-pandemic levels. A lot of firms are also using more temp workers, as one person said, just to stay flexible. So it's not a boom, but it's not a bust either. It feels like a return to something more normal.
Of course, you can't talk about jobs in this day and age without bringing up the elephant in the room, AI, right? It's a huge source of anxiety for so many of us. So what does our little dossier of clues have to say about that? Well, the answer, for now at least, is not yet. The folks on the ground, the business owners talking to the feds, they're saying that, yeah, they're looking into AI, they're exploring it, but its actual impact on jobs right now is pretty limited. They think the really big effects are still a few years away. And this is a perfect example of where we just have to be honest and say, we don't know the full story yet.
It's still unfolding.
All right, so the job market is stabilizing. That brings us to the final and maybe the most frustrating piece of the puzzle, prices. Why are some things still so darn expensive? Well, the Beige Book points a finger at some very specific pressure points that businesses are dealing with.
And this one is huge. This quote from the National Summary really says it all. One of the most consistent themes they heard from all across the country was about the pressure from tariffs. Now, just as a quick refresher, tariffs are basically just taxes on goods that are imported from other countries. And what the report is saying is that these are a major factor pushing up costs for businesses. Doesn't matter if you're in Boston or San Francisco.
So how does that actually trickle down to us? Well, it's basically a chain reaction. Step 1. The tariff makes it more expensive for a company to buy its materials or products. Step 2. For a while, a lot of businesses just ate that extra cost. They absorbed it because they didn't want to hike up prices on their customers. But now we're at step 3. The report says those companies are running out of their old, cheaper inventory, their profit margins are getting squeezed super tight, and now they have to start passing those higher costs along to you.
But, and here's the twist that ties it all back together, the report also notes that some businesses are really reluctant to raise their prices. We're talking mostly about retailers and restaurants here. And why? Well, it goes back to that tale of two consumers. They know that a huge chunk of their customer base is already incredibly price sensitive. They're worried that if they raise prices even a little bit more, those people will just stop showing up. It's a really tough balancing act they're trying to pull off.
Okay, so we've gathered all of our clues. We've looked at the big picture, we've seen the split in consumer spending, we've checked in on jobs, and we've talked about prices. Now it's time to put it all together. Let's build our economic decoder ring.
So, what did we crack in this case? What are the key takeaways? First, the economy is never just good or bad. That's way too simple. It's a really complex mix of some slow growth, a stabilizing job market, and some very real pressure points. Second, and this might be the most important one, your own personal experience of the economy can be wildly different from someone else's, all depending on your situation. Third, the job market is stabilizing. It's normalizing. It's not shrinking or collapsing. And finally, yeah, those price pressures are still very real, and things like tariffs are playing a huge role.
So now you have the decoder ring. The next time you see one of those confusing economic headlines, you can use it. You can ask yourself, okay, who is this story really about? Is this talking about the high-end consumer or the person who's counting every penny? Does this headline reflect that stabilizing, backfilling job market we just talked about? The whole point of looking at something like the Beige Book is that it teaches you to look past the simple good/bad headlines and see the real, messy, and much more interesting story that's hiding just underneath. So what are you going to be listening for in the news now?